p.m. I think we can start now. First, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming to this research conversation today. This is the very first one this academic year, and special thanks to Dr. Robert Catena, who will be presenting here in a short while. Dr. Robert Catena is an Associate Professor of Kinesiology at the WSU College of Education. He completed his postdoctoral work at the Harvard School of Public Health and received his PhD and Master of Science from the University of Oregon. He is originally from Alaska and received his bachelor's degree from the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. Dr. Catena is the director of Gait and Posture Biomechanics Lab at Washington State University on the Pullman campus. His research focuses on preventing falls and occupational injuries during pregnancy. He has published in numerous high-impact journals and presented at national and international research conferences. Today, Dr. Catena will discuss his path from a brief conversation with a National Science Foundation program officer at a conference to receiving recent NSF funding. It will address challenges and tips for submission and resubmission. During the discussion today, we invite you to join the conversation and share your own experiences with the National Science Foundation, both successful and not yet successful. In fact, I dare say that all of these experiences to me are successful. Even when we are not funded, we gain a whole lot of experiences that we can bring to the next step in the journey. So Dr. Catena will also touch on differences between the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Health for proposal planning. Dr. Robert Catena is a key faculty in our kinesiology program housed in the Department of Kinesiology and Educational Psychology. Terrific work in that program and in the department, and we're so fortunate to have Dr. Catena come out to represent the program today. Thank you so very much, Robert, and I would hand over to you without any further ado. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Shola. Shola mentioned that I'm going to touch on some of my experiences and differences and experiences between NSF and NIH, or really Department of Health and Human Services in general. But I also welcome, I don't have experience with Department of Education, and I'd welcome people to chime in at any time and tell us how the Department of Education works also, or other funding agencies that are typically applied to in our college. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about my research to start off with, the research related to this project that we're awarded for. Just for some context, not to explain my whole research agenda by any means. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about my impressions, experiences, my confusion still with the process, challenges and tips for the submission and resubmission. And as I mentioned, I'm going to touch on the differences between NSF and Department of Health and Human Services, which primarily NIH, but CDC, NIOSH, HRSA have all applied for in the past, fall under, they all have a similar application process. So, and I'm not going to touch on the commonalities for every grant proposal. So I'm not going to say, you should have a good team to work with. That's kind of a given, and you should definitely pay attention to the details, but more focus on the differences in the application. So, yeah. As I mentioned, I'm going to start off with a little bit of my research. Orthopedic issues are prevalent during pregnancy. The most common of orthopedic issues is low back and pelvic pain, which the incidence rates are nearly 90% for pregnant individuals. Um, and this is an interesting thing for me coming from my background, which was my undergrad was in biology. It's an interesting thing for me to think about how we evolved how the two sexes kind of evolved a little bit differently um, since we became bipedal and how the spine has changed and how the musculoskeletal system has changed. And obviously, being bipedal, there's some evolutionary benefit to it. But at the same time, quadrupedal animals that we presumably evolved from, they don't have these orthopedic issues. There was kind of a trade-off here, and that's kind of interesting. Like it must have been that much more beneficial to be bipedal and to have females suffer from all the orthopedic issues that they suffer from, especially as a result of pregnancy. Going a little bit further, not just thinking about our past, the evolutionary past, but current products today, how products are designed to alleviate a lot of the orthopedic issues that pregnant individuals experience. Here's just a couple common products out there. Thinking about how these are designed and should all pregnant individuals be using these and when should they be using these and how do you even know other than I started experiencing pain, how do you know if you should start off using these or not? And then there's a lot of unknowns about how those orthopedic issues during pregnancy, how they translate into older adulthood. We know that once pregnant individuals, older adults now, they have a lot more orthopedic issues than individuals that had never been pregnant. Um, but is there something that we can do during pregnancy to possibly stave off the development of orthopedic issues later on in older adulthood? So. Um, so really, this title of the slide is my research problem. The real problem here is time. Like I don't have the ability to go back and study individuals in our evolutionary past. I mean, we can look at skeletal remains, but those are only good back 2 million years, and then we have hardly anything to tell us beyond that. And I can't study a pregnant individual now and keep studying that pregnant individual through older adulthood for 30 years. Um, so, uh, yeah, that's the real problem is just time. So the solution is to have musculoskeletal simulations. If we can simulate the evolutionary past or the future for a pregnant individual turning into an older adult, if we can simulate that properly, then maybe we can start looking at this from a different perspective, figuring out these issues. But there are no musculoskeletal simulation options for pregnant individuals. And so that's what this project is really about simulation development. And I throw a couple of pictures here, not related to my project, just so everyone understands this is like a common like simulation problem, like car crashes. Um, to properly simulate car crashes and not actually test humans experiencing a car crash, we have to first start off with a really good model, a biofidelic model that accurately represents the situation or the person in the car crash. And then, we have to know what our end goal of the simulation is. This is for car crashes. So now for us, having a biofidelic model or an accurate model is really about how do muscle properties, muscle contractile properties change during pregnancy. If we can figure out that, then we can use that as inputs to really understand the development of musculoskeletal issues, orthopedic issues. So that is part of this project, is looking at how muscle contractile properties change during pregnancy. And then another part of this project that was awarded was to look at the end goal, to figure out what the end goal is for our simulation. What do pregnant individuals at different time points during pregnancy, what do they prioritize? And how does that change during pregnancy? So maybe we would all tend to prioritize energy or efficiency, but maybe that changes at some point during pregnancy, and there's a prioritization towards balance or strength to support your body weight, or protecting the fetus, reducing fetal accelerations. So that's the kind of second part of this project, is to look at what is that end goal. And overall, again, this is about developing musculoskeletal simulation techniques that will allow us to study a lot of orthopedic issues related to pregnancy. Okay, so that's the project in a nutshell. But I'm going to talk mostly about my experiences. So I have a little cartoon example here of my experiences. So we just recently got awarded just last month. Got the notice of that, but the whole process started back in 2021 when I met a program officer at a conference. And this was during COVID, so this was a virtual meeting with a program officer at American Society of Biomechanics. Then a year later, submitted the first proposal that the program officer kind of pushed me toward. Then in there, I had a sabbatical related to this project, 2022 to 23. And at during the sabbatical, I realized that maybe this first proposal, it was kind of leading to a dead end, my original submission. And I didn't really realize that until I worked with really experts in my field that were doing similar stuff. Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, I guess it all worked out in the end. That first proposal was rejected and got a lot of good feedback on that. But during my sabbatical, I realized I really needed to switch gears. I need to take a little bit different path. And even before my first proposal was rejected, I was already thinking about my second proposal, because I had hints that my first proposal was not going to be successful. So then submitted second proposal September of 2023. Got reviewer comments back in July in this summer, and that led to the award a month later. So I'm going to talk about each one of these steps and talk about the things that were interesting and confusing still about this process for me. And again, other people, please chime in about your experiences related to these or differences to other funding mechanisms. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the differences between DHHS, Department of Health and Human Services, which encompasses NIH and CDC, and but people with Department of Education experience, please chime in also. First thing, it seems every time I talk with a Department of Health and Human Services program officer, they're all really busy. And they have, it seems to me, they have only a short period of time to really talk with me about my project, as opposed to my experience with NSF. Well, the FOA that I applied for, there are several program officers on it. I've seen over the past 4 years, I've seen a program officer from NSF at each one of my conferences. They're showing up to conferences, and if you are ever hosting a conference, I would definitely recommend putting a call out to program officers. They seem very willing to show up to conferences and talk about application to different funding mechanisms at NSF. And the program officers that I worked with were always willing to answer questions and open to helping me out. So I think I saw something in the chat. Um, is there, I don't, AG, maybe you have the chat open?
Anne was agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, so my experience with NSF, reach out to program officers often and ask questions, ask for guidance. They seem very willing to help. I would say the same thing about NIH program officers. You can try, but it's always seems like they're very busy. I've had one really good experience with a program officer at NIH. I shouldn't say always. They seem busy, but for the most part, they seem a lot busier than the NSF program officers. So now on to the first application. So on the left there, kind of the standard template for NIH application. You describe your significance and your innovation and your approach. And on the right there for NSF. This was kind of interesting going into this application for me. My NIH experience is it's all about the research project. And my experience with NSF, limited as it is that it's partially about the research project, but it's also there's a lot about the impact that you can have, not just with the project, but just in general, how much like the types of impact that you can have. And I highlighted a few areas where, I was able to talk about my past contributions, not related to the project necessarily, or in my DEI plan and broader impacts. There's a few areas in that NSF application where I can expand on more than just the project itself. Whereas I really feel like with my NIH applications, there's a small section in the impact where I can really touch on some of that stuff. So I thought this was interesting. It's an impression, and I'm not sure if it was a challenge or not. It means your NSF application is about more than just the research project itself. So that was my impression. I think I saw another thing pop up in the chat. I'm always open to people chiming in too. I don't have my chat open, so let me know if there's a comment.
Yeah, Kristen Lessig said in terms of NSF program officer availability, I think it also depends on the specific program.
Oh yeah, maybe I just got really lucky with my program officers, for sure. Then still in that first application, I want to point out that this was a little bit confusing when I started off. So your DHS applications, they tell you a dollar limit for direct costs. NSF, it was total costs. There's a dollar limit, so you have to factor in the indirect costs in that. And I don't know indirect costs off the top of my head. I don't think about those. And there's less money overall. And this is really interesting. I thought this was a challenge. This idea that we should be collaborating and have a team of researchers, yet there seems to be less funding for team research in NSF. They fund the PI and not as much definitely as NIH, but then they're very, I don't know if stingy is the right word, but stingy with giving funding to other people on the team. And so we had to find creative ways to kind of fund collaborators on this. So definitely a challenge. And my recommendation, start planning with your team, making sure that they're on board with how much money you're willing and not willing, not able to pay. And be frank with those conversations, and hopefully they'll be honest with you about their willingness to be a part of it if they're not getting a certain amount. And definitely start planning with your budget person even earlier than you would do with a NIH application, because of those indirect costs. Like I said, I had no idea like what indirect costs um, might add up to in that total budget. So. Okay, so on to the first draft, and it getting rejected. This was definitely another challenge with NSF. So my NIH applications, I have 3 reviewers, as opposed to 4 reviewers on this NSF application. That's not necessarily the challenge of having a 4th review, but my NIH gives you clear scores. Like, it gives you actual quantitative, it gives you numbers to work with. Like, your application was scored at this level. And NSF doesn't do that. There's no score. And so the challenge there was the interpretation of the reviewer comments. Like, they said what they said, but did they actually think my application was good without giving me a score, that made it hard to interpret. And so my advice, my experience was I reached out to the program officer a little bit, but other people who have done NSF applications, and ask them for their interpretation my of my reviewer comments, and just to help understand uh, how they felt the reviewers were really giving me information, what they were giving me information, kind of the nuances or the hidden innuendos of their comments. So, and it definitely helps in deciding the next steps, whether you want to resubmit, or well, NSF, that's an interesting thing. There is no resubmission if you want to completely change your project, or just tweak it a little bit. So, yeah. Oh, and that leads me to this. With the NIH, you can decide to resubmit or decide to do a whole new application. No resubmission on the NSF. It was basically a brand new application. They didn't look at reviewer comments. I didn't know how to take this. I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. It worked out for me in the end that they didn't look at past reviewer comments. I could imagine if I was right on the border in my past application, evident by the numbers that they showed me, my scores, that I would want them to look at past reviewer comments. And so I guess sometimes this can be a good thing, sometimes this could be a bad thing. I saw a person comment chat. Sorry, AG, I'm relying on you.
That's okay. It's from Shola. He said there are sometimes rotational program officers at NSF. They are only there for a few years, so it is always good to know if the program officer is on a rotation about to go back to his or her university, or is just getting in there and has more time to work with prospective applicants. And although I find permanent program officers very helpful.
Yeah, I should actually mention the program officer that I was originally communicating with was one of those non-permanent, those transitional people, and she transitioned off prior to this award, but it worked out in the end. She was really helpful, and then she moved on to back to her home institution, and somebody else came on, and the next person was really helpful also to providing feedback on that. So I was fortunate, I guess, in that situation. I keep mentioning how fortunate, there's a lot of things that just kind of worked out for this. And maybe that's part of the game. It's just, a little bit of luck in there. There was another comment.
Shola said, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so then, as I mentioned, we did the second application, reviewer comments came back. This was where I was really confused. So these are the three reviewer comments that I got back. They're just a little bit they're shortened, but this is basically it. My aim 3 lacked purpose. Can I explain that better? Explain why I didn't check the human subjects box. There was a complete omission of we forgot to check there was actually human subjects on this in the cover, and explain why we're not collecting data from people with low back pain. We didn't put that into our application. We said that we're going to collect data from healthy pregnant individuals. I looked at this and if I saw this, and I was the reviewer, if these were my comments, I probably would have rejected this application if one of my aims completely lacked purpose, and I thought that if the team should have been collecting data from a completely different population. I don't know that I would have wanted to approve this application or award this application. So this was, like I say here, I would have considered these deal breakers. Like I don't know if this should have been funded, if these were their comments. So that was really confusing to me, and I haven't asked about the program officer about that yet. I'm giving it a little bit of time to settle. I don't want to rock the boat at all, but I was really kind of surprised when these comments came back, and then a month later, I had some time to comment on those. As I mentioned, they asked for a 2-page response. They gave me 4 days to respond to these comments. So I was working pretty diligently over those 4 days to come up with a 2-page response to answer all of this. Yeah, I'm interested in other people's experience with reviewer comments, and as I mentioned, I would have totally not accepted my application if these were my comments. Not to say these comments are correct, I explained that, but if I thought these were the case, I definitely wouldn't have been funding my application. So anyone else want to chime in with?
Yeah, it's not so much about the comments, but just that experience of it just baffles me sometimes where your proposal has been sitting over there for 6 months or whatever, and all of a sudden we had a week. You have a week to respond to these things, right? We got 5 pages though, so I guess we should have been happy. But a week in the middle of the summer to find all of my research collaborators over the summer and say, hey, guess what? We have 5 days to respond to all of these things if we want money. But yeah, it was so we did have a similar experience in that there was some like expand your theoretical framework around blah blah blah, and but then they also suggested like changes in our budget, which were not that we're going to give you less money, but consider switching where your money is, like put it less towards this and more towards this. And we're like, oh, okay, as long as you're not taking money away, we're fine with that. But
yeah, I guess I found it really interesting, maybe a similar experience to it just didn't, it seemed like there was a lot of ways to massage the application at this reviewer comment stage, maybe with the budget and providing more explanation in areas. And I really wasn't kind of expecting that in that experience. What else? Yeah, thanks, Christian. So that is what I have in my experiences and my confusions, my impressions, how they differ from NIH. And I would love for people to comment, as I mentioned, about the Department of Education or other funding mechanisms, other places to apply to, how they are similar or different. Anyone want to chime in on Department of Education here?
Robert, I have a question just to start us off, and I'll, as I said, lightly moderate us until we finish. I was just very interested in that first program officer meeting, which you had virtually at a conference. You talked about. How did that go? And was that the first program officer? Was that a rotational person?
Yeah, that was a rotational person. Yeah, she was at our American Society of Biomechanics conference. Like I mentioned, it was virtual then, but even in person, every conference since, I've seen an NSF program officer there.
Did you seek her out, or did she come and say, "I want to speak to you. I read about you." How did that all go for you?
So she was part of a session that they had on applying to NSF. They had their own little section, and then we were able to ask questions later on. I was able to get a hold of her, not immediately after the session, not during the session, but was able to just kind of sit down and talk with her one-on-one and ask her questions about that. I had not heard about the specific FOA that I applied for. I never heard of it. But she offered up that suggestion, like, this might be a really good route for you to apply for this particular project, given how you're seeing how you're going to go on sabbatical, and it kind of incorporates that sabbatical with it. Yeah, she didn't come up to me, but like I said, she was very willing to help out and talk with me. I think we talked for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour about different funding mechanisms at NSF and what might be most appropriate for the project or the pseudo project that I had kind of developed or thought about at the time.
Thank you. Any others? You put your hands up or just chime in.
It sounds like I had maybe a really good experience with a program officer compared to some other people. I just assume that these program officers that I've worked at with the NSF, they're all like this, but maybe not. Maybe I just got really
Does
lucky.
anyone have any
I have a question.
tales? Go ahead, Anne.
Do you have, so some of the feedback I've gotten from NIH is that we aren't experienced enough because we haven't done an NIH funded clinical trial. And so, I've tried the strategy of throwing on somebody with a lot of experience as a consultant, and then that also got criticized because they weren't at WSU. And it is a little bit of whack-a-mole, I feel like, in the experience of the different kinds of feedback you get on each time you submit. And I wondered if you could speak to that at all at NSF or just in your experience of, is it really a limiting factor if you haven't had that kind of funded project, that it really is a limiting factor in getting positive feedback on your proposal? Or is there a strategic way to build your team in such a way that increases your chances in that way?
I've had similar experience with NIH. about the team, and I've found that when I put really experienced people on my applications, they tend to get a little bit better scores. And, at NSF, so I should mention, so the people that I'm working with, they're really experienced in the area of musculoskeletal modeling. Very well known. So, I think definitely having them on the application was good. I had them on the application because I went and did my sabbatical with them. And I feel like, that was a really good way to kind of ease them into being a part of my team. Just starting off and doing a sabbatical with them. And I think that also helped my application a lot. Showed the reviewers that, I went on sabbatical. I've worked with these people for a year now. So they're not just people I'm throwing onto my application. Even if you're not doing that, it might appear to the reviewers that that's the case. So that was my experience.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Others?
that's helpful.
I,
Thank you.
oh,
Go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to actually ask you something. So you started mentioning about the team, and that was going to be one of my questions, was to talk about what team you had for this grant. And you also mentioned that you felt like NSF didn't support sort of that team approach very well. And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so they don't support it like directly giving money to co-investigators. And so what we did instead was, they seem very willing to put money towards students. So instead, we're paying for, a PhD student at University of Michigan for a little bit, and paying for a PhD student at Beth Israel Medical Center. Like we're giving them money kind of indirectly. Um, yeah, so that's how I think you can get around that a little bit, and support the team. You have to kind of have that conversation, though, it seems like from the very beginning, like, I'm not going to give you money, but I'm going to give you money to help out a student. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And I think there was a first part to that. Maybe I missed also that question, Sarah.
Well, I was just going to ask who your team was and how did you put that team together?
Oh, yeah.
You've kind of answered bits of it, but
Yeah, I mentioned where my team is from. So as I mentioned, they're big into the musculoskeletal modeling. I bring the work with pregnant individuals to the table. They have all the musculoskeletal simulation experience, and I was seeking out people that are well known for this, to do my sabbatical. Not necessarily to apply for this. I was already thinking about my sabbatical before I thought about this application. And yeah, and then they were willing to be part of the application after that. So.
Robert, I was just going to ask you about some of the changes between like your initial proposal and the one that got funded. Specifically, were you focused, like with regarding the change in the successful one, were you focused more on like the mechanistic impacts or the theoretical impacts or like the applied value of the project? And you think that led to the success, or was it just like sort of expressing those ideas more? Like, what do you think it was about it that led to the approval?
I think, my second proposal was vastly different from my first proposal. Like a whole different topic. Like we're still doing musculoskeletal modeling, but it was completely around us, like a different thing to impact. It was around balance control, and then we made the switch based off of reviewer comments and stuff. Yeah, it was a really different application altogether, that second one compared to the first one. I felt really hesitant doing that, completely switching up my application as I did. Um, but it kind of worked out in the fact that there's no resubmission process and they're not looking at past reviewer comments. I think that also worked in my favor for that second application. They're not looking back and seeing, stuff related to this topic, and all of a sudden I'm talking about this different topic. Yeah, so again, it's one of those things that kind of just worked out for me in that process.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments or sharing your own experiences? While people are thinking, Robert, I want to ask you a sort of a content question away from this NSF discussion. Well, actually, first I want to ask you about this whole number 3 here, why you're not collecting data from people with low back pain. That seems like just such an off-the-wall comment to me because it's so obvious what you are doing. I'm sure you made it completely transparent what you were doing. And so why, maybe that's just a comment that we often get comments from people that you don't know whether they've read the whole application or they've read the whole article or whatever. What do you think? Is it something that you should have said, like we aren't doing this because we're doing pregnant individuals?
Yeah. The application is about developing the musculoskeletal modeling and simulation, and so we're working from a framework of healthy individuals and their potential for developing low back pain. I thought it was really off the wall kind of comment, and I mentioned even more so because we're told that maybe if it's related to some clinical related outcome, we can't apply to NSF, where we have to apply to NIH. They won't fund something related to a disease or maybe in this case an orthopedic issue, and that's really NIH's purview. I didn't expect this sort of comment. Do I feel like they didn't read? No, I felt like they read my application. I just didn't explain it very well. Like the reviewer comments that I got back, they were very thorough from the first application. Maybe it was the case, but I feel like since these came from the program officer, she was kind of screening things, screening the reviewer comments. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like I said, it was really confusing for me in multiple facets to get this comment. Evidently, I explained it well enough in my rebuttal that it got funded, but I still don't know. And like I said, there's still things I want to ask the program officer that I'm not willing to do right now until I definitely have my budget and I got my money and like it's sitting in the bank and stuff. And I don't want to rock the boat right now. So,
Robert, that made me think of a question too, is in these comments that you only had a few days to respond to, were you able to work with the program officer to try to kind of understand more about how you could address those in a way that would meet their goals, or were you just given 4 days and you had to work independently on those?
no, like this happened over the summer and it happened over a weekend also. And the program officer, I was sending questions back and forth with the program officer, and she was responding to me right away. So, I was very thankful for the program officer and how willing she was to work with me on trying to understand the questions a little bit more and then, how to go about responding to them.
Yeah, I think that that's good advice for people to think about how important it might be to get clarifications about some of the comments or some of the directions or even some of the priorities of the funding agencies to make sure that yeah, you really understand what the important issue is to address. And I think that that is best addressed probably by having those conversations.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that just and there were even just logistical things on how to respond to these questions and what exactly I was allowed to do and how many references I was allowed to provide to each of them. And no, she's fully willing to answer those very quickly.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Robert, Josh Taylor has said, this has been extremely helpful to get a peek behind the scenes with the process you experienced, Robert. Thank you very much for being so open and sharing this with us! Exclamation point.
Oh, yeah.
That's good. I think there may be another message too. Oh, that's it. Robert, can you tell me, we just got a couple minutes here. So does anyone else have any other questions before I ask my final one? I'll give sufficient wait time. Can you tell me when the biofidelic model came about? I mean, is that something that has evolved? I mean, has there been a long evolution of, people using skeletons and, pre-computers and pre-imaging and so forth and so simulations that people have used? And how did it come about?
Yeah, so we're not inventing any computer simulation techniques, I should say that. I'm not a computer scientist. All this framework has been developed over the software that we're using has been developed over the last 30 years by a different group. And what we're doing is they've made it freely available because they were funded by NIH to originally do it. And so they made all their software freely available. We're just adding on to create another model set there within their framework. What did people do before that? There was probably I think that it was very limited in what people could do prior to the 90s when these things were developed. And the fact that the biofidelity of the model, that all that is saying is really just like it accurately represents what we want to represent. As I mentioned, crash test dummies are biofidelic in that they accurately represent like a 50th percentile male driver. But they have other crash test dummies that are supposed to represent different sexes and heights. And, that's the biofidelity, is that it actually, it accurately represents what you want to model. Yeah, so in this case, we want to accurately model a pregnant individual. We need something out there. We need to know how pregnancy changes the musculoskeletal system. So, yeah, that's what we're doing.
That's terrific, Robert. Thank you so very much. We have a number of, I don't know if you're able to see the chat, but we've had a number of people say thanks to you, Michael Dunn, Shanghai Dai, Kira Carbonneau, and Shola, well, many more people. Brian French said, a good lesson in persistence that our work requires to obtain funding. Thanks for sharing. Have a good afternoon. All right. Thank you very much, Robert. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn this over to Shola and Laura to maybe give a little brief teaser for the next research conversation.
Yes, I'd like to let you know that we have 2 more of these this fall. On October 17th, we have Ting Li, who is a new science education faculty member. On November 14th, we have Peng He, who is also new in science education here at COE. So we hope to see you. We'll be sending the Zoom ads out to everybody. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Robert. And thanks for all of you for coming.